I'm going to do a poem analysis of the poem Eurydice by our beloved Carol Ann Duffy. And to understand the poem fully, I'm first going to tell you a little bit about who Eurydice was. And Eurydice, she was an oak nymph, or one of the daughters of Apollo, which is the god of music. And on her wedding day, when she died, because she stepped on a snake, then her husband Orpheus tried to bring her back from the dead, the underworld, with enchanting music, and then Hades and Persephone were like, sure, but however, there's a catch. Eurydice must walk behind you, her husband, as you ascend back to the upper world, and he's not allowed, and you're not allowed to look back at her, as and then Orpheus, he was like, no problem. But then Orpheus, he was overcome with passion just as they were about to reach the exit. And then he looks at her, and she disappeared back into the underworld again. Then Orpheus, he's sad and he wanders around Greece playing sad music, continuously writing his poetry. Eventually, he's ripped to shreds by a group of drunken women, and then he is reunited with his long-lost wife in the underworld. The entire poem is narrated by Eurydice, who tells us about how she feels about the whole story, everything that's been happening up until now, and why she's reacted how she has. The tone of the first stanza is very laid back and controversial, as if she's chatting to a group of girls, which you can see in the first the very first word of the poem. The entire story is told from her point of view. Usually we only hear about Orpheus' heroic act of traveling into the underworld, but now we hear about about her story and the fact that she might not really have wanted to be saved. Okay, so as I said before, the tone of the first stanza is very laid back and controversial. She is dead. She is literally dead and down, as stated in the first line. Later on, Carol Ann Duffy repeats black. She's black and empty in this place, as this place seems to be. Eurydice doesn't appear to want language, as she also mentioned language stopped, which challenges the reader to think more critically about what was originally depicted as a heroic and tragic love story. Duffy uses this word to play to the point out to the audience that there's no real evidence to suggest that Eurydice wanted to be saved. And the last sentence implies that being dead actually suits her and that she might even enjoy it. Stanza 2, so imagine me there, unavailable. Duffy, or Eurydice, continues in a controversial mode, conveying a sense of intimate female friendships. Later on, Eurydice describes her increasing irritation, shown in this sentence, from the kind of a man who follows her around writing poems, hovers about while she reads them, calls her his muse, emphasized in the words follows her round and hovers, which imply annoyance and contempt. She's just obsessed by his she's oppressed by his constant attention, and she's just so annoyed about it. In stanza 3, she refers to the big O, which I think is the big Orpheus. Him, the big Orpheus, larger than life, implying that he can just travel forth and back from the dead into life without any problem. And then in this last part of the stanza, with me as a prize, she implies that she feels cheapened, like an object or a prize that she has no sense of being valued or understood as a complete person, which just further annoys her. In stanza 4, Eurydice's tone is sarcastic and contemptuous, using exaggeration in the bizarre examples from the myth down here, indicating that she was not impressed with the inflated praise he received. Here in the last part, the sullen stones at his feet wept wee and silver tears, are personified to convey the idea that his creative power may may bring inanimate objects to life, but she's clearly unaffected by his talent and doesn't really care about it. Further in stanza 5, um, I'd rather speak for myself. This part is a crucial point to the poem, as she feels as she felt as if she had no voice and no identity of her own. And then at the very end, then be dearest, beloved, dark lady, white goddess, etc., etc. This is a list of loving expressions, but none crediting her with the characteristics of a flesh and blood woman. So just these titles that doesn't really mean anything to her. In stanza 6, this part marked in red, but the gods are like publishers, usually male, is a very complex piece of language, because it not only reflects on the historical case of men being the known writers and acclaimed poets, with almost no known documentation by women in previous ages, but it may also bear meaning in Duffy's personal experience. As if gods are like publishers, then they have the right to say what's written in law and history, much like publishers do when agreeing to produce books. Again, depicting how little control Eurydice had over her situation, amplifying Duffy's message of how little women had in the way of writing their own stories and being published. Stanza 7 clearly communicates Eurydice's frustration at Orpheus and the gods for removing her from a place that she actually likes. By referring to other Greek myths such as Sisyphus and Tantalus, both men punished by the gods, Duffy's use of figurative language creates the idea that once again Eurydice has no say in what's happening and feels as if she's being punished for no reason. Sisyphus, who is forced to roll a rock up a hill but can never reach the top before it rolls down, and Tantalus, who's surrounded by food and drink, but when he reaches for it, it's always just beyond his grasp, are both let off the hook, if you can say it like that. And now Sisyphus, he can sit on his rock for the first time in years, and Tantalus, he's permitted for a couple of beers. Also, the fact that these two characters are men shows how both Eurydice and Duffy feel that these men are just exempt or released from punishment. Losing Eurydice was a punishment for Orpheus, but a release for Eurydice. But I mean, he just gets let off because he's a man and he gets to be with her again. And again, there's no real evidence to suggest that she wanted to be saved, and the language once again challenges the reader to think critically about the original story. Alright, stanza 8. I must follow him back to our life. Eurydice. Orpheus' wife. Alright, so the pause between Eurydice and Orpheus' wife is a deliberate break in the message Duffy is trying to communicate. Eurydice is distancing herself from Orpheus and her title, because that's all that she is to the outside world, his trophy wife, a title known throughout the history. And she's just annoyed with the fact that she is best known by her role rather than as a person, as an individual person. Stanza 9. After the word myth in stanza 8, after this long enumeration, Eurydice tells the reader or the listener what the myth involves here, and this is pretty much what stanza 9 involves. And in the very end of the stanza, for Eurydice, walking back into the underworld is just a mechanical process. She has no emotion or whatsoever invested in being saved by her savior. Quickly to stanza 10. In the very first sentence, girls forget what you read. We're again reminded that this is an intimate conversation amongst women. Duffy is very keen to point out that women's version of the events usually described by men is very different. This basically just implies that she wants to get rid of him and she doesn't really want him. This part down here, marked in red, I was dead, deceased, I was resting in peace, passé, late, past by my cell date. It's just a listing of all the ways of being dead, kind of humorous, the past my sell by date. And these, the colors here, but already the light had saddened from purple to gray. It's the underworld. The underworld is kind of her freedom, and the light is kind of saddened now from purple to gray, so everything is just gray. The mood kind of changes from lyrical to serious, like please, please let me stay. It's an achingly pleading. Here, please let me stay. Expressing yearning for freedom. And the colors again just kind of evoke a mood of grief and mournfulness. Poor Eurydice. Right, stanza 11. How much to say? The last part here, my voice shook when I spoke. Orpheus, your poem's a masterpiece. I'd love to hear it again. Eurydice uses false flattery to achieve her ends, and Duffy's highlighting these strategies that powerless women are obliged to use in order to achieve what they want. So just emphasizing Duffy's point. Stanza 12. This is kind of a complex idea. Eurydice is indeed talented. Here, the dead are so talented, emphasizing that Eurydice is indeed talented and that she finds a way to escape him. It's kind of ironic as Orpheus was the one regarded as having the musical and poetic talent. This is a lyrical end to the poem, The Vast Lake. The vast lake mentioned here could be the mythical waters across which the dead are ferried to Hades, and the living are always close to death, kind of symbolizing how short life can be. It's the silence of the dead that is wise, implying that Orpheus' songs and poetry are no significance, just empty words and music, and it's only death that brings peace and wisdom. Alright, the use of language in Eurydice is also very important in creating the tone of the poem. Eurydice has a very structured. Each stanza is a different length. Some stanzas are only consisting of one line, and others span nearly a page. The punctuation is also more varied, with some lines appearing in parentheses and other use ellipses. The use of punctuation also draws more attention to the words and language it accompanies, in effect making it stand out. The very stanza length, coupled with these diverse punctuation, means that the structure of the poem is very unique and has strong effect on how the poem is read and received. The tone, of course, is very controversial. I think we've all figured that out. And it's aimed at a certain group of people, namely women, which is not unusual for Carol Ann Duffy's poems. Throughout the poem, as I've mentioned, she uses many literary devices. This is also something that Carol Ann Duffy is very known for. Both repetition to emphasize couplets, enumeration, a lot of enumeration, pathetic fallacy, anecdotes, intertextuality, of course, with the Eurydice story being told in a different way now, list of threes, personification, all of these literary devices that Carol Ann Duffy is very well known for. And the theme of the poem, gender roles, the empowering of women and oppression, of poor Eurydice trying to break free from her husband.